81. The importance of order. George's behavior was a bit rude, even disrespectful, but Cedric and the twins had known each other since childhood, so they took it in stride. Ada patted George on the shoulder and told him to stop. Realizing his mistake, George fell silent. Ada is fine. Esmeralda is fine. Either one works. My friends usually call me Ada, she said. Then we're friends from now on. Cedric grinned. Ada, you can call me Ced too. Fred and George do. Cedric had heard the story of how the twins and Ada met. He thought if he'd been the one helping with the luggage back then, they might have become friends much sooner. They were in the same year and both born in 1977, Cedric's birthday just a little earlier. They both loved reading, both were top students, and they had so much in common, it would be a shame if they weren't friends. They chatted casually for a few more minutes. The atmosphere was friendly. The twins felt slightly awkward, but it wasn't obvious. All right, I should go. See you in class. Cedric's friends called to him, so he had to cut the conversation short and ran off to catch up with them. Cedric is really handsome, Katie blurted, already enchanted by his looks. The other girls nodded in agreement while the three boys curled their lips in disdain. Ada didn't volunteer an opinion, which made Alicia curious. Ada, what do you think? Alicia asked. He's all right? Who knows who'll end up with him? Ada replied. You only think he's all right? Alicia was genuinely surprised by Ada's taste. Then who do you find handsome? I think Fred and George are quite handsome too, Ada said. She'd like the idea of saying Al Pacino, but they probably wouldn't know him. Oliver Wood is handsome as well. At first, the twins brightened at Ada's answer, until she added Wood, then the smiles faded a touch. While they were still talking, Charlie announced the recruitment list. Angelina and Alicia had both made it, and the twins had kept the boast they'd made to Ada. After the time for the first full team practice of the year was set, the Gryffindors gradually dispersed. Tomorrow was the weekend, and everyone planned to enjoy themselves. At 7 that evening, Ada returned to the potions dungeon. Professor Snape had moved the detention originally scheduled for Wednesday to Friday, so even if Ada was tired, she wouldn't miss any classes the next day. Tonight, unlike last time, Snape hadn't set out 3 cauldrons to torment her, which was a small relief. She didn't want to spend the entire weekend in bed. Ada stood before a table that was empty. No cauldron, not even a flobberworm. Just as she was wondering what surprise Snape had in store, he handed her a black cloth and told her to put it over her eyes. The blindfold was completely opaque. With it on, she couldn't see a thing and felt a little exposed. Snape pulled a small bottle from his robe, removed the stopper, and placed it before her. Identify the potion by smell, he said. He might as well have been training a tracking dog. Ada regretted not bringing galleons for bribery. She sniffed carefully. After a long moment, she admitted, Rum. Are you sure? Yes, rum. She stuck to it. She could smell the alcohol, though she couldn't pick out any other ingredients. Snape put the bottle away with a drawl. Seems your days at the leaky cauldron were not wasted. Perhaps you should abandon school for a career there. 3 broomsticks in the cauldron both make a mean red currant rum. The rum had been a test and a bait. Snape continued to pull out bottles, one after another, potions, tinctures, and a number of ordinary beverages. He made her smell each one. Some she avoided, others buried her. By the end, her nose was so raw and aching that she could barely breathe. At last, mercifully, Snape stopped. Ada removed the blindfold and rubbed her sore nose. Snape produced 2 small vials from his robe, one green and one blue. She reached out to sniff them automatically, but Snape had prepared them for treatment. The green was for external application, the blue for drinking. He had made them before, but had forgotten to give them at the last session. Ada twisted the stopper off the blue potion and drank. It was horrendous. She nearly vomited. She thought nothing could taste worse. Then she dabbed the green potion on her nose. It vanished into her skin, and a cool relief spread through her nostrils. The soreness eased almost instantly. Aside from the blue potion's revolting taste, Snape's remedies worked quickly. She meant to thank him. Instead, Snape remarked flatly, Next time, remember to apply the external potion first, then drink the blue one. The taste is a bit better that way, but the effect is the same regardless. Yours worked just as well with your order. He made no show of tricking her. He had it all prepared, and simply accepted that she'd drunk them in the wrong order. "Consider this a lesson in impulsiveness," he added. "You don't need to come next Friday. I'll tell you when to come again." Despite Snape's sarcasm, the session had been useful. Ada had memorized the scents of several potions and drinks. If she encountered them again, she would recognize them and avoid accidental ingestion in future. She left the dungeon with more knowledge than she'd come for. Winnie, the house elf, accompanied her back to the Gryffindor Tower. Snape had arranged it. On the walk, Ada chatted with Winnie about the castle's secrets. House elves had lived at Hogwarts for centuries and knew much more of its history and hidden corners than any first year. At the entrance to the common room, they met Toller, who had just returned. He'd served detention with Professor McGonagall while Ada had been reporting to Snape. Both were detentions, but between very different teachers. Toller had been waiting for retaliation from Ada and the twins for over a week. When nothing had happened, he'd decided they were too afraid of losing house points to act and had grown even more contemptuous toward Ada. Ada had intended to go straight inside, but Toller's insolent stare was too much. She drew her wand and pointed it at him. "You'd better look at people respectfully or lower your head," she said. "Miss, please don't do that. It'll cause you trouble." Winnie tugged at Ada's sleeve and tried to calm her. Toller didn't lower his gaze. "Either bow your head or pick up your wand like me," Ada said, stepping in front of him, Winnie still whispering at her to put the wand away. Toller smirked, convinced she wouldn't dare. Ada tapped his cheek with the tip of her wand and whispered, "You're right, I'm from an orphanage. What made you think that Harry from an orphanage can be bullied without consequence?" 82. The Secret of the Twins. Winnie, the house elf, had been trying to stop Ada from doing something rash. To Toller, though, it didn't seem like help at all. It felt like pity. Pity from a lowly house elf. When had he fallen so low? Ada's wand was pressed to his face. She spoke calmly, a smile still playing at her lips. To Toller, that smile was obvious mockery, a sneer at his weakness and incompetence. He wanted to draw his own wand, to stand up to her, but his hands trembled. Could he even hold his wand steady? Could he take on this so-called mudblood in front of him? Ada might be crazy. She could strike at any moment. The wand at his temple made the threat real. Fear wrapped around him and squeezed. He could not hold the standoff. The pressure of the wand increased, and Ada's patience, he felt, was about to run out. Pride swallowed, Toller lowered his head and would not meet the demon's eyes. He stared at the floor like a beaten dog, every breath sounding harsh in his own ears. Ada eased the wand away and stepped back 2 paces. Since he had backed down, there was no need to press it. "Get out," she said. Toller fled without looking back, as if even a second's delay would invite a hex. He stammered the fat lady's password. The portrait swung open, painfully slow to his panicked eyes, and he scrambled through. The common room was alive with the usual noise, students chasing each other, small groups doing homework or gossiping. In his rush, Toller bumped into someone and sent them sprawling. The crash drew every head. Dozens of eyes took in his disheveled state. Humiliation washed over him darker than any spell. He ignored the fallen student and hurried to his dormitory, pulled the blanket up over his head, and would not risk another glance. Outside the portrait, Winnie unclenched Ada's robe and patted her chest with small, shaky hands. The elf had been terrified. She liked Miss Trist and had not known how to stop what was happening. Winnie believed if Toller had kept refusing, Miss Trist would have cast a spell. She could feel it. "Miss shouldn't have done that. You hurt another student. The professors will punish you," she murmured. Elves were not supposed to say such things. "Don't worry, Winnie. I was only scaring him." Ada crouched to meet the house elf's wide eyes. He would have folded anyway. "Why are you so sure Mr. Toller would give in?" Winnie asked. "Because he doesn't have the nerve." Ada's voice was flat. "I bumped into him in the underground classroom and he just cursed me from behind. Just now, I put my wand to his face and he didn't even try to resist. Honestly, I kind of wished he'd draw his wand. At least then I'd respect him. I can't imagine how he got into Gryffindor. It was too dangerous. Miss shouldn't have done that. You could have been hurt. The professors will be angry if they find out," Winnie fretted. "All right, Winnie, I'm going back. We'll see each other later." Ada straightened and slipped through the portrait. The house elf bowed deeply and only stood when the fat lady shut the entrance again. Inside the common room, Ada offered quick greetings to familiar faces. For some reason, more than a few students were looking her way with curious expressions. Fred and George lounged in armchairs, tinkering with small magical gadgets, something they'd clearly picked up for mischief. When Ada sat with them, they shoved the devices into their bags. "Why's everyone staring?" Ada muttered, rubbing the tip of her nose with her fingers. "Is something wrong with my face? Is my nose red?" "What are you talking about? It's not red," George said. "Did Snape hex it while you weren't looking?" The twins teased, but soon explained. When Taller had stumbled into the common room, everyone had seen how afraid he looked. Then Ada had come in behind him, and the pieces clicked. Of course, people imagined what had happened, imagined Taller being scared by Ada. The Gryffindors had been starved for gossip this year. A bit of drama was exactly what they wanted. "What did you do to him? Did you deck him?" Fred asked, making a punching motion. "Or the bat bogey hex? Didn't you and Ginny practice it over the holidays?" George had always wanted to see that one in action. If it could rattle Snape, it would be legendary. Ada shook her head. "I just scared him. I didn't hit him or shout at him." "Just scared him? You're scary enough." "He looked like a troll was chasing him," both twins said, grinning. Ada ignored the troll remark. "This ends now. Don't pick on Taller, and no stunts behind my back. Charlie wouldn't want his beater missing a match because of detention, would he?" "We were planning to give him a hard time," Fred said, glancing toward the boys' dormitory. "But if you say so, we'll call it off." "Besides, Fred and I have a lot going on," George added, shrugging. "You two have been secretive lately. What are you up to?" Ada asked, uneasy. The twins had been behaving oddly. They hadn't been running all over the castle as usual. Fred beckoned her over. The three leaned in close. Each twin whispered into one ear, "It's a secret." Karma, Ada thought wryly. Last year she had kept Fooley's affair from the twins for months. This year the twins were keeping things from her. Everybody had secrets, the ones you couldn't or wouldn't tell. Ada had her own list, longer than either twins. In the end, they were even. 83. The Story of the Dark Wizard. Cecil by the Black Lake, a cream-colored Labrador, tore after a butterfly, plunging and leaping with all the clumsy determination of youth. The butterfly fluttered up and away, easily evading the puppy and leaving behind nothing but frustrated barks. The dog was Galleon. Its owner sat beneath a broad tree, a book open in her lap. Warm sunlight fell across Trist, and a light breeze lifted her golden hair. It was morning, and the shores of the Black Lake were still quiet, so she had left Galleon untied, letting him roam. It had been half a month since term began. Galleon was finally at home with Hogwarts. On their first walks, he had trailed behind her with his tail between his legs, an image that no longer applied. As the sun brightened, more people drifted down to the lake. When Hogsmeade trips weren't an option on the weekend, the Black Lake was a pleasant alternative. Sometimes you could even glimpse the giant squid. Trist called Galleon back, fitted him with a muzzle and leash, and gathered her things. The place was getting too crowded for reading. "I didn't expect to see you here, Trist." She turned. Professor Glover Cecil stood a few paces away, dark blue robes rustling, his pipe in hand. "Professor Cecil," she said, "are you here to read? Morning's the best time for it." He came over and stroked Galleon. "What's his name?" "Galleon. A good name, rather worldly but popular." He straightened. "Do you mind walking with an old man on a sunny morning?" He fell into step ahead. Trist walked behind him with Galleon's leash in her hand. If not for their odd clothing, the pair might have looked like a grandfather taking his granddaughter for a stroll. They walked quietly until Cecil spoke again. "I heard some things about you from Dumbledore," he said. "You're brave, but not nearly wise enough." Trist kept silent. She didn't know why he had invited her to walk, but saying less was usually the best choice. She waited for him to continue. "I should be the first to tell you this, right?" Cecil went on. "You're brave because you're willing to face the dark arts. You're not smart because you choose to face them, alone." His meaning, though clumsy, was clear enough. Going alone to face Fooley had been the most foolish thing she'd done. Last year she had plenty of time to tell Professor McGonagall what was happening, but she had borne it to herself and nearly paid with her life. "So you understand." Cecil said. Your marks are excellent, which means your mind works, but you use it for study and not for other things. He packed tobacco into his pipe with careful fingers. You don't mind if I smoke, do you? I don't mind, Trist answered. Even if she had, Cecil would have smoked. That he asked at all felt considerate. He sealed the pipe in his mouth. He didn't strike a match, but the tobacco glowed as if lit by magic. Thick blue smoke veiled his face. The expression behind his glasses was partly hidden, but not the sadness in his eyes. Someone else told me the same thing once, Trist said after a moment. Snape. He never praised me. To him, I was as stupid as a troll. Cecil's mouth twitched into a smile that was nearly a grimace. You're the most beautiful troll I've ever seen, he said. They walked a little farther. I'm getting old, he added with a sigh. Just a few steps and I tire, nowhere near Dumbledore. That old busybody gets sharper with every year. He chuckled softly. Funny thing, Dumbledore caught me once. Trist blinked. Before term started, she'd only known that the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor was a friend of Dumbledore's. She hadn't known he'd once been a dark wizard or that he'd served time in Azkaban. Hearing it felt like being given a great deal of new information all at once. You said in class you paid a heavy price, she remarked. That's one way to put it. He took a long puff, and the smoke curled out between his teeth. Family and freedom. Is that heavy enough? Do you want to hear the rest? Trist had come out to read and found a professor instead. She agreed. Cecil leaned against a pale boulder by the water and began, his voice steady but threaded with memory. The first time I encountered the dark arts was during Grindelwald's rise, he said. Everyone's attention was on Grindelwald and his followers. Who would notice a man in the countryside alone, caught up in a different kind of fanaticism? How much of his story was exact truth and how much had been dressed by memory, Trist couldn't tell. But the sorrow in his eyes was unmistakable. He'd been born into a wizarding family with 2 older brothers and a younger sister. He'd excelled at Hogwarts, head boy, top of his class, and his future had seemed assured. 2 years after graduation, he joined the ministry as an Auror and had laid out his plans. Then, one terrible summer, everything changed. His mother and sister were murdered while out shopping, killed brutally by a dark wizard. Consumed by grief and the need for revenge, Cecil used his connections to track the killer. He didn't tell anyone. He went alone to the dark wizard's supposed hideout and walked into a trap. The younger man with reverence for power was no match for an experienced killer. He fled, shattered, and humiliated. By the time he and other Aurors returned, the murderer had vanished. He never found him. Revenge slipped from his hands, and so did the rest of his life. He began coming in late, drinking more and more. The once promising head boy was gone. Night after night, he dreamed the same thing. The murder, the face of the killer smiling as he struck, the feeling of being overpowered by spells he couldn't answer. The obsession took him. He began collecting every scrap of information about the dark wizard, and he buried himself in the dark arts. At school, he had been like everyone else, taught to see the dark arts as monstrous, but studying it closely changed him. He came to believe the magic itself was not the problem. People were. He learned spells and practices that grew his power. The more he learned, the more his hunger for revenge burned. Still, the dark wizard remained elusive. Bitter and restless, he continued to study, hoping to one day turn that study into the means of retribution. Then one day an old friend came to see him with news, and with it a new lead. Apparently a man known as Snake's Big Tail had put up a generous reward. Cecil paused and exhaled a long plume of smoke. The story held for now, and whatever followed was a hand extended into a past that had shaped him. 84. Overwhelmed by sadness. Cecil had thought he'd found his friend's killer, but he hadn't. The dark wizard seemed to have vanished into thin air. His friends returned with nothing but information about the killer's family. The joy that had swelled in Cecil's chest evaporated. After seeing his friends off, he drank himself into a stupor and wrecked his living quarters. When he sobered the next day, he hit upon an idea. He would wait outside the killer's family home and trap the murderer when he came back. In the wrecked room, Cecil frantically hunted the parchment his friends had left with the family's address. He found it, then settled down within sight of the house and watched, waiting for the killer to appear. He wanted to kill him with his own hands, in front of the family, to avenge his mother and sister. A year passed, and the killer never showed. The daily vigil and the slow gnawing of hope drove Cecil toward madness. His temper grew violent. The people in that house went about their lives in a happiness Cecil once enjoyed, and which the killer had so cruelly stolen from him. Cecil made another decision. "There aren't many dark wizards in Britain," he said aloud, refilling his pipe. When Grindelwald rose, many joined him. After Dumbledore defeated Grindelwald, many followers died. Maybe the killer went off with Grindelwald and was killed, or maybe he died somewhere long ago. The dark arts are dangerous. Ada had already guessed where his thoughts were heading. After the story had reached this point, the outcome was not hard to see. "That's right," Cecil continued, full of remorse. "I hurt his family. I transferred my hatred to them. It's the decision I regret most in my life." A crime like that could not stay hidden. The Ministry of Magic, still raw from the terror of Grindelwald's reign, would not allow such an atrocity. They traced the attack back to Cecil. Taft, the minister of the time, sent many Aurors and even authorized the use of unforgivable curses, clear sign of how seriously the ministry took it. Many of the Aurors had once worked alongside Cecil. They found it hard to believe the well-mannered young man they knew could turn into a dark wizard and commit such cruelty. At first, Cecil did not want to hurt those hunting him. He fled, even planning to escape abroad. Before leaving, he tried to see his family one last time, but their reaction was scalding. His father sickened with anger at what Cecil had become. His brothers fought him, and the family was shamed. Heartbroken, Cecil left. As he headed for a smuggling point, the Aurors closed in again. The last thread of his sanity snapped. In his madness, he decided to kill everyone pursuing him. The Aurors were overmatched and in grave danger when Dumbledore appeared. When Grindelwald had swept across Europe, Dumbledore had been his only real opponent. In 1945, he had personally defeated him. If even Grindelwald was no match for Dumbledore, what chance did Cecil have? Dumbledore defeated him, but did not kill him. Instead, Cecil was sent to Azkaban, where he stayed 30 years. "Dementors guard that place," he said, pain etched into his face. "There you don't feel a single shred of happiness. I spent every day in torment. Those I killed or harmed always came back in my dreams. If not for my mother and sister, I might have died there long ago, or gone completely mad." "After Azkaban, I tried to atone," Cecil went on. "I did many things, even though I knew none of it would ever make up for what I'd done." He fell silent, squatting on the ground, unable to calm himself. "What about your family? Have you seen them?" Ada asked. "No, I don't have the face to see them. My father never forgave me until he died," Cecil said. "I don't regret studying the dark arts. What I regret is becoming like the killer, doing the same cruel things. Sometimes I wonder," he continued, voice raw, "if I hadn't gone after the killer alone, if I'd brought other Aurors, would I have caught him? If I hadn't been blinded by power, would I have become a murderer? It's all what if. A mistake is a mistake. What is done, and you must bear the consequences." Ada sat there, unsure how to comfort him. Compared to Cecil, her own life felt empty, like a blank piece of parchment. Cecil Glover was a pitiable, hateful man whose remaining days seemed likely to be filled only with pain and remorse. Perhaps this was the harshest punishment Merlin could have devised. Ada couldn't understand why Cecil had told her all of this. They had known each other only 2 weeks. Even if Cecil was eager to recruit talent, there had to be better times than now to share such things. Ada couldn't grasp his purpose in unburdening himself. Cecil rose and faced the Black Lake, tears still on his lined face. He waved for Ada to go. He needed to be alone. Ada led Galleon back to the castle, but Cecil's desolate figure kept replaying in her mind. She looked back once more. Cecil remained standing by the Black Lake, utterly alone. In the afternoon, Ada returned to the underground training room. Though she had prepared protective charms and bruise cream, she still left marked and sore. Facing the trial dummy, she couldn't concentrate. Whether attacking or defending, she moved like a novice. Exhausted and out of sorts, she cut the session short and trudged back to the dormitory. All day, a knot of sadness sat in her throat. Memories of past mistakes gnawed at her, the choices she regretted, the moments that left her with remorse. She wondered how different things might have been had she acted otherwise. Etta wasn't easily swayed, nor was she moved only by sympathy for Cecil. She was trapped in her own recollections, the illusions she'd built for herself. Everyone has events they regret. Everyone carries a few things best forgotten, but most often remembered. After dinner, she sat in an armchair in the common room, a book unopened in her hands. The twins opposite her had been watching all afternoon and were worried. She had been off. They pestered her with questions, but got only perfunctory, distracted answers. They tried to make her laugh, but her smiles were edged with sorrow, like a clown forced to perform. At last, the twins gave up and let her go to her dormitory. They sat for a while longer, thinking. They needed to find new ways to pull Ada out of this, because left as she was, trouble would follow. It was late. The twins planned to search the library first thing in the morning for anything that might help. Ada, lying in bed and overwhelmed by her own sadness, did not know how anxiously the twins were plotting on her behalf. She did not know about the heated discussion in the head's office on the 8th floor, nor did she know that the desolate old man by the Black Lake had smiled faintly to himself as she left. That night, Ida did not sleep well. What one thinks about during the day surfaces at night, and she drifted through dream after dream. Memories of the past and of Fred and George, the three of them out playing together, the three of them opening a joke shop. When she finally crawled out of the last of those reveries, it was well past noon. Sunlight made her squint. She reached for the glass on the bedside table and found it empty. In her absent-mindedness, the night before she had forgotten to pour water. Throwing off the covers, she shuffled in her slippers to the tap. It felt cruel not to have a drink first thing. The dormitory was empty. Charlie had scheduled the first official team training for Sunday afternoon after the Quidditch tryouts, so Angelina and Alicia were already on the pitch. Katie Bell was probably either there too or playing with her little friend Linny. After washing, Ida went down to the common room. Her tangled hair was smoothed out, and she walked slowly, her right index finger tapping the stair railing as if she were still elsewhere in thought. The twins were in their Quidditch robes, playing wizard's chess. As soon as they saw Ida, they called her name, shouting loud enough to earn a few irritated looks from the others in the common room. Ida had woken too late and missed lunch. Unless she wanted to go hungry the whole afternoon, she needed to eat. Fortunately, Fred and George had brought food back from the Great Hall. They had stuck around precisely because they were waiting for her. They thrust plates into her hands and hurried off to the pitch, already late for training because they'd waited. Before they left, they clapped her on the shoulder, as if to say, "We've got you." Clutching the pie Fred had given her, Ada sat for a long time, stomach rumbling, before she realized she had to eat. Someone had waited for her. Someone had gone out of their way to help her through a bad time. That, she decided, was gift enough. The twins' wizard's chess game lay half finished. They weren't concentrating, so the board was a mess and many pieces were gone. Ada knew chess well enough, but wizard's chess was another matter. She was terrible at it. People generally avoided including her. Playing with a hopeless opponent only made you worse. She could only watch and learn, like those men who stand around a bench watching an old master tip the pieces in the park. She could have read manuals or practiced on her own, but she'd always devoted herself more to her studies than to hobbies. After she'd filled her stomach, Ida went out for some air. Fresh wind helped keep her from sinking back into memory. On the pitch, the Gryffindor team were running through tactics under Charlie's direction. Many players were new this year and unfamiliar with the team's routines. With over a month to the Quidditch Cup, they had to gel fast. This was Charlie's last year at school, and he wanted to lead the team to victory before he left. Fred and George were practicing their hits, working the bludgers to find the right force and rhythm. As beaters and as twins, their synchronicity made them a dangerous pair. The chasers were flying in an arrowhead formation, the hawkhead attack, streaming toward the goalposts to apply pressure and force mistakes. Charlie had been trying Angelina as the tip of the formation. He was optimistic about the second year and thought she might be the team's main scorer. Keeper Oliver Wood flew circles around the goalposts, fast and confident. Aside from Charlie, Wood was the strongest player on the team. If he could stay in form for a full match, the goalposts were the team's most reliable link. Last year, he'd been knocked from his broom by a bludger, and Gryffindor lost because of it. Sitting on the sidelines, Ada watched them all. She knew Charlie's tactics inside out, could explain them as well as any coach, and she was familiar with maneuvers like the Transylvanian tackle and the Ronsky feint. She probably knew more written tactics than Charlie did, but he could put them into practice. That was why he was captain, and she sat on the bench. Ida thought that, given their current talent, Charlie and Wood could both make a living from Quidditch if they chose to. It was a pity Charlie appeared more interested in studying dragons. The British Quidditch world would lose a good player. This season, the team had promising additions in Angelina and Alicia, and the twins were like two living bludgers out on the pitch. For the first time in a while, it felt like there was a real chance of winning the cup. Professor McGonagall, stern as she usually was, would have been overjoyed. As training wound down, Oliver Wood took over from Charlie to address the team. Charlie was already starting to hand authority to Wood, so the team would run smoothly when Wood became captain next year. When Wood finished, the twins ran over to Ada, grinning. "Did you see us?" Fred said. "On match day against Slytherin, we'll be sending half their team to the infirmary with bludgers." "I saw Wood was the one giving you the sternest lecture," Ida teased. "Are you sure you can handle a match?" "Wood's like a stubborn block of wood," George said. "We got used to him last year. Getting him not to criticize is as hard as getting Filch not to dote on Mrs. Norris," Fred added, dragging Filch into the joke. They could have gone on making Filch jokes for days. Seeing Ada laugh made them both a little lighter. She hadn't come back fully to her old self, but she joked with them, and that counted for progress. Ida had woken up resolved to change. She couldn't go on as she had been. The twins had been late for training just to wait for her. If she lingered in the past, she would be letting them down. The vigor on the pitch, the shouting and the flying, gradually pulled her out of herself. She had been like a bud that had folded up in a storm, clinging to memories of sunny days. But those sunny days had been nourishment. Now that the storm had passed, she could bloom again, brighter than before. 86. Swamp in the classroom. A new week had begun, and after 2 weeks back at school, the students had finally settled into a routine, picking up again the knowledge they devoured over the holidays. The professors no longer looked as harried. Professor McGonagall paced the Transfiguration classroom. Although most students still hadn't managed to turn a caterpillar into a chess piece, the rate at which caterpillars were being eaten had dropped noticeably, and the frantic, angry squashing had all but stopped. A few students' caterpillars were beginning to show signs of becoming chess pieces, and with more practice, they should be able to complete the full transfiguration. McGonagall was in a good mood, pleased with the class's progress. The first student in the room to fully transform a caterpillar into a chess piece remained Ada. She had already made a knight and a king. Now she was preparing to make a queen. Each piece she produced had been vivid and precise. The knight on a rearing horse, the king with an imposing bearing. Waving her wand, Ada completed the spell, and the caterpillar became a queen clad in armor, sword in hand, more a battle leader than a courtly sovereign, brows knit with the stern air of a warrior. McGonagall stood behind her, watching quietly. Ada's skill in transfiguration was no doubt the product of careful teaching, and something had shifted in the girl lately that McGonagall couldn't quite name. Whatever it was, Ada was developing well, and that reassured the professor. That afternoon was Defense Against the Dark Arts. Professor Glover Cecil's words by the Black Lake on Saturday still nagged at Ada's mind. She wasn't sure whether he had been helping her or manipulating her. Recounting a tragic past usually draws sympathy and pity, but Cecil's story had cut deeper. At first, it had left her nearly paralyzed by nostalgia and sorrow, almost destroying her. Then, when she shook free, it had clarified how she should live from then on. From that point of view, his tale had done her some good. Every conversation with these old figures of the wizarding world made her feel her own shallowness. She often couldn't see through them and had to think long and hard about what their actions meant. The desks in the defense classroom were pushed to the sides, leaving a large clearing in front of the podium covered by a black cloth. Near the window, Cecil sat smoking, pale blue smoke curling around him. There was no trace of the grief Ada remembered near the lake. He now resembled his first-day self, wry, knowledgeable, and slightly amused. He watched Ada as she laughed with her friends and seemed pleased. He had expected she might need time or never recover, but she had regained her balance quickly, and that surprised him. When the bell rang, Cecil put away his pipe and stood. "The dark arts are numerous and ever-changing," he said. "Fighting them is like fighting a monster with many heads. You cut one off, and another looks at you. It becomes craftier and more dangerous." A ripple of unease ran through the students, their grips tightened on their books. "If it doesn't have a head, how can it look at people?" Fred muttered. "I'd like to know that too," Lee Jordan added with a lascivious grin, clearly imagining something absurd. Ada thought of something else entirely, something that would be more like a god than a mere dark creature, but she kept that thought to herself. "Why don't you ask him?" she suggested to Lee. Lee shook his head hard. No one wanted to be associated with Professor Cecil. Since term began, he had been an enigmatic, intimidating presence. Students loved his lectures, but few would speak to him after class. As soon as class dismissed, they scattered as if fleeing a troll with a club. Cecil lifted his wand, and the black cloth vanished, revealing a small, perfectly realistic swamp laid out on the classroom floor. A winding boardwalk cut through it, leading from the student's end to where he stood. The stench and the mist were convincing enough to set teeth on edge. "They live in places like this," Cecil said. "They lie in wait for travelers. Does anyone know what creature I mean?" The students looked blank, though the swamp radiated threat. Ada raised her hand. Cecil beckoned her. "A hinky-punk," she answered. "They're solitary, one-legged creatures that look like dancing smoke, fragile at first glance, but they lure travelers off the path into the bog. When someone sinks and drowns, the hinky-punk feeds." "Correct," Cecil said, clapping slowly. 5 points to Gryffindor," he smiled. "Terrifying in description, but actually manageable if you don't let them lead you astray. Today," he went on, "you will practice resisting a hinky-punk's lure and crossing this swamp." He stepped down from the podium. "Don't worry, you are safe. I will protect you." Every student took a simultaneous, instinctive step back. None of them moved forward. Cecil's smile never faltered. "No volunteers, then? I can't let class stop for lack of bravery. I suppose I'll have to select someone at random." 87. Funny kids one by one. The students lowered their heads. No one wanted to be the first to step into the swamp. Ada knew the hinky-punk's description well. This creature could be deadly. If something went wrong and Professor Cecil couldn't help in time, couldn't she be hurt? In the crowd, Fred and George Weasley watched with keen interest. They wanted to see what the creature looked like. Lately, they had been looking for fresh inspiration. Cecil scanned the classroom. Whenever he looked at them, the students instinctively turned away. He didn't seem to mind. Smiling, he said, "I've already decided who I'm going to pick." "It can't be me," Ada thought. Until he announced a name, nobody dared relax. Everyone's unspoken plea was the same: choose anyone but me. "Lee Jordan," Cecil called. "Let's welcome our Gryffindor champion." A collective sigh of relief swept the room. Fred and George fought to keep straight faces while Lee Jordan, dark-skinned and now several shades paler, walked out with a long face. He didn't even hear Angelina's cheers. His mind was occupied with thoughts of whether Cecil would be able to save him, whether he'd sink or be eaten. Professor Cecil squeezed Lee's shoulder and murmured, "Relax, young man. As long as you don't give in to the temptation, you'll be fine. I'll be watching the whole time." As Lee stepped into the swamp, a thick white mist rose and completely hid him from the student's view. The twins' expressions shifted from amusement to a hint of anxiety. This wasn't what they'd expected. Fred asked, "Ada, Lee's going to be all right, isn't he?" The fact that Cecil dared to use a hinky-punk for a lesson meant he could rescue a student from it. If he couldn't, it would be a teaching accident no one could afford. Besides, Cecil had once been a dark wizard. If he couldn't handle a hinky-punk, that would be embarrassing. "It's fine. Trust Cecil," Ada replied. Even if Lee couldn't resist, Cecil would get him out. Despite the fog, all the students stared at the swamp. The shorter ones were on tiptoe trying to see. After a while, a scream sounded from within, Lee Jordan's voice. Cecil stood by the edge and waved his wand through the mist. The white fog vanished instantly, revealing Lee with one foot on the path and the other stuck deep in the muck. He wasn't in mortal danger, but terror was written all over his face. "You two plan to tease him for the rest of his life, do you?" Ada teased the twins when she saw Lee was unharmed. "Absolutely," they answered with laughs, then pushed through the crowd to help the trembling Lee back. When they neared the swamp, no fog rose. Cecil was keeping it at bay. Back among the others, Lee calmed and flushed red with embarrassment. "What did you see? What did you hear?" Fred pressed, curious about the temptation. Lee hesitated, too mortified to speak, but the prodding continued. In a tiny buzzing voice, he admitted, "I heard Angelina's voice, and then I forgot I was even in defense against the dark arts." If there had been a crack in the floor, Lee would have slid right into it. Angelina, nearby, blushed and moved silently to stand on Ada's other side. Reassured that Lee was safe, the class eagerly signed up. They formed a line and passed through the swamp one by one. Some went straight through in seconds, others took longer. A few were tempted and stumbled into the muck, but the swamp was shallow, and Cecil never left his post, so no one was harmed. Fred and George crossed without temptation. They were even a little disappointed at not getting to see the hinky punk. When they returned, Lee was even more miserable. Soon it was Ada's turn. Cecil approached and warned her, "No magic to force your way through the mist. Today's lesson is only about resisting the hinky punk's temptation." Ada nodded, and he let her go. The mist rose again as she stepped on. She didn't draw her wand. Instead, she swept a hand in front of her face to clear a patch of fog so she could see the path beneath her feet. From the edge, the swamp looked small, but once inside, it seemed larger than it appeared. Ada wondered briefly if some extension charm was at work, but she had no time for conjecture. The hinky punk began its work. First, Ada saw a middle-aged couple waving her back for dinner. She ignored them and walked on. Then Mrs. Weasley's voice called her home. Ada still kept going. The swamp filled with familiar faces and well-loved voices. She even saw Mrs. Mary, but Mary looked ill and far thinner than she remembered, and that sight puzzled Ada. Outside, the students whispered. Ada's stay was unusually long, longer than anyone else's except for herbology, and the class went quiet with growing concern. The twins stared anxiously. They hadn't forgotten how Ada had looked on Saturday and worried she might not resist the temptation in her fragile state. Cecil stood motionless at the edge, wand ready to dispel the mist at any moment, though he didn't. He murmured to himself, so low no one else heard, "Interesting. What an interesting one." He couldn't see through the illusions, but he could see through the mist, and he knew Ada was fine. She hadn't stayed because she couldn't leave. She stayed because she chose to. The hinky punk kept weaving visual and auditory illusions, but they no longer affected Ada. She recognized them as false and let them play out. She wanted to say goodbye to her past. This was a place to see them one last time. Except for Mrs. Mary, all the illusions were precisely what she wanted to see, and she let them be, though she still didn't understand why Mary appeared sick in the vision. At last, Ada emerged. Her robes were tidy, not a hair out of place, hardly the look of someone who'd been delayed, and she walked back to the twins as if she'd merely been waking from a nap, stretching and yawning. "Why did you take so long?" Fred said without sounding worried. "I thought you were off polishing your shoes and washing your socks today." "When have you ever seen her polishing her shoes? Doesn't she usually clean them with a charm?" George added. "At school, Ada's the one who'd need a house elf the most." Ada rolled her eyes. "Why come out early? The hinky punk's illusions were fun. If I ever have a courtyard, I'll make a swamp and keep a few of them for amusement." Her companions hadn't expected that to be the reason for her delay. They couldn't help but exclaim that Ada really was far too playful. 88. A calm October. While Ada's companions couldn't read her thoughts, the other students in the classroom were already filing into the swamp. No one wanted to miss such an exciting and apparently safe exercise, and they urged the students ahead of them to hurry. The thick fog in the swamp gathered and dispersed around them. Those who found their own way out exchanged stories of the illusions they'd seen and how they'd overcome them. The ones who failed stood to the side, dejected, listening to their classmates' boasts. Cecil showed some mercy. Students who hadn't passed were allowed to try again, but only at the back of the queue. Encouraged by Fred and George, Lee Jordan obediently went to the end of the line. The twins told him he'd been the first to face the hinky punk with no prior experience, so failure was normal. Now that he was trying a second time and mentally prepared, he was sure to succeed. Bolstered by their confidence, Lee marched to the queue as if he were about to charge into battle and capture the hinky punk alive. He never got the chance. Just as it was almost his turn, the bell signaling the end of class rang. Lee could only bow his head and follow everyone out. The twins' mischievous grins were impossible to hide. Lee wrestled with them in the corridor, embarrassed but soon swept up in their teasing. By the time they reached the common room, his mortification had faded. The Gryffindor second years were still buzzing about the lesson, and older students shared tales of more advanced defense against the dark arts classes, Kappas, Grindylows, Boggarts, and the like. The first years listened, envious and eager to sneak into higher year lessons. Everyone spoke highly of Professor Cecil, especially the 5th and 7th years, preparing for the wizarding level exam. Having such a capable DAA teacher felt like a stroke of luck. October kept the twins busy. Their pranks became less frequent, less risky than during their first year, as if they'd grown more sensible, because there was Quidditch training to attend. Charlie ran a tight ship. He could handle the twins, and Wood on the team was a powder keg. Fred and George didn't want to miss practice. They wanted to make sure Slytherin felt the sting when the season began, and then deal with Cedric's Hufflepuff side as well. Ada noticed they'd been doing small experiments in their spare time and had recently bought a lot from a joke shop, but they kept their projects secret. Ada assumed it had something to do with their usual hobbies. Ada's own October was busy. In addition to classes, she had extra tutoring. From the first of the month, she was called to Snape's office. This time, it wasn't the usual 3 cauldrons and a scatter of small potion bottles. They worked in a little room near Snape's office. Under his guidance, Ada began brewing a potion she'd never learned before. Its production cycle was long, and she had to check on it almost every evening, adding ingredients, observing changes, making careful adjustments. On top of that, she had her own responsibilities, studying and returning to the underground room to fight the puppets. The days were full, but Ada felt relieved. There had been no incidents at the school. Even Glover Cecil, who had once tricked her, had kept his distance. His only oddity was liking to ask her questions in class and generously awarding extra points. Ada had been nervous about Halloween, given that last year's troubles had begun on Halloween Eve, but it passed uneventfully. Everyone enjoyed the feast in the Great Hall. November brought a hard cold. The mountains around the school were gray and frosting lay on the ground. The Black Lake's surface was as hard and cold as tempered steel. One Saturday morning, Ada, cup in hand, stood at the window and watched Hagrid, wrapped in a leather coat and gloves, clearing snow from the Quidditch pitch. The match everyone had been waiting for was today, Gryffindor versus Slytherin. After weeks of training, the new team members would be tested. Ada felt anxious for the twins and for her roommate. She and her roommates left the warm common room into the clear, frosty morning. The Great Hall smelled of sausages and fried eggs and buzzed with nervous excitement about the match. Breakfast was hearty, but Angelina and Alicia could barely eat. It was their first official Quidditch match, and they were full of worry about performing, about losing, about letting down Professor McGonagall and Charlie. Captain Charlie Weasley arrived with his 2 younger brothers. The twins were in high spirits. Charlie had clearly put them at ease. He patted Angelina and Alicia on the shoulder. "It's very cold today, so eat up," he said. "It'll keep you warm and give you strength." They nodded and put eggs to their mouths, but the food tasted like cardboard to them. "Don't overthink it," Charlie added. "Just get the quaffle through the hoops like you always do." "The hoops will look as wide as the sea to you," the twins chimed in and then fell silent. They sat, snatched Ada's full plate, and began eating with such appetite it startled her. "We need to eat more to have the strength to swing the bat," Fred declared. "Send all those Slytherins to the hospital wing to introduce themselves to Madame Pomfrey." George growled through a mouthful. Ada didn't mind. She took another plate, filled it up, and set it in front of them, pouring 2 glasses of pumpkin juice to keep them from choking on the sausages. Once Charlie left, the 2 girls relaxed and began shoveling food into their mouths like the twins, cheeks puffed out like hamsters. Around 10 o'clock, the castle emptied, and a tide of students poured out toward the pitch. Ada and Lee Jordan accompanied the twins to the Gryffindor changing room. Ada hugged each of them and wished them luck before leaving. She and Lee walked toward the stands. The noise from the crowd rose like a thing of its own. It was so loud, Ada couldn't hear Lee. "What did you say?" she shouted. "Where are you going?" "I said, I'm not going to the stands. Go on without me," Lee replied, his voice almost lost in the roar. Ada grabbed him, thinking he was upset about not being picked. "Aren't you cheering for Angelina?" Lee wrenched free. "I really have something to do. You'll know soon enough." With that, he ran off, leaving Ada alone in the cold November wind, bewildered. Watching Lee Jordan stride away across the pitch, Ada thought it would be better to tell the twins about this later. They were boys, after all, and more likely to give practical advice. She didn't want the joker Lee Jordan to end up tragic. Around her, the Gryffindor stands were packed, students waving banners and shouting everything from encouragements to confident proclamations that Gryffindor would win. She had meant to make a special cheer prop, but she'd been too busy and never found the time. Now both teams filed out of the changing rooms, Gryffindor in scarlet robes, Slytherin in green, and the noise swelled. "All right, we see both teams have entered the field, and I'm feeling very optimistic about Gryffindor." Lee Jordan's booming voice carried across the stadium. Lee loved Quidditch. He'd wanted to play for the house team with his mates, but hadn't been picked, so he'd become a commentator instead, living the game through his words. The players met at the center, where Madame Hooch waited. After a few brief instructions, everyone mounted their brooms. At her whistle, 15 brooms rose, and the match began. Gryffindor took the first attack. Their 3 chasers flew in an arrowhead formation, Angelina leading with the quaffle. Lee's commentary was a running, enthusiastic roast and praise of Angelina. Ada watched anxiously as 2 burly Slytherins closed in on her. She could almost feel the impact. She wished she could shout a hex on them, but the roar of the crowd swallowed her voice. Angelina pushed through, forced toward the sideline, and, seemingly by mistake, threw the quaffle behind her. Everyone around gasped as an unmarked Alicia Spinnet appeared, caught the ball, and had a clear shot. "Alicia Spinnet has the ball. She shoots. Good girl. Gryffindor scores," Lee cried, practically ready to leap down and celebrate with the players. Captain Charlie Weasley smiled, pleased but not surprised. He knew the partnership between Angelina and Alicia could produce clever, unorthodox plays. Ada joined the cheering, half amazed that what looked like a risky pass had paid off. Slytherin answered fiercely. Marcus Flint darted past the pursuing chasers and dodged a bludger the twins had sent after him, launching a powerful throw at the hoops. Oliver Wood, Gryffindor's keeper, blocked it and spun a counterattack. Tauntingly wagging a finger at Flint, Wood only made the Slytherin louder and angrier. The stands echoed Gryffindor's cheers. Slytherin's cries were edged with frustration. Angelina and Alicia, who lived and ate together, moved with natural chemistry. When one broke through, the other provided perfect distraction or a deceptively placed pass. Fred and George played an excellent game as beaters, keeping the Slytherin chasers under constant pressure. Slytherin's beaters barely registered in comparison. No one had expected such a strong performance from a Gryffindor team that had been largely rebuilt. 4 new, inexperienced players were turning into constant problems Slytherin hadn't figured out how to counter. Still, Slytherin's defense grew rougher. Pusey and Flint began body-slamming Angelina and Alicia to strip them of the quaffle. As Slytherin's aggression paid off, they found more counterattack chances and finally breached Wood's defense. Bitter boos rained down from the Gryffindor stands. "That's a foul! They're like uncivilized barbarians," Ada shouted, joining the chorus. "Fred, George, hit them hard or don't come back!" Points traded back and forth, but Gryffindor held the lead. Both teams knew the snitch would decide the match. Slytherin's seeker, Higgs, was the first to spot the glittering gold and streaked after it, Charlie close behind. George launched a bludger at Higgs to disrupt him. Higgs dodged, but then another bludger followed. George was covering. Fred was the real threat, and Higgs had to wrench his broom sideways to avoid being knocked off. In that commotion, the snitch darted away, and neither side could break the score gap. After that scare, the twins focused relentlessly on Higgs, battering bludgers at him until he couldn't search calmly. Charlie shifted his attention too, scanning the air for the little darting glint. Then the snitch flashed again, and this time Charlie saw it first. He followed its path with Higgs on his tail. Higgs's broom had more speed. He closed in fast and even tried to ram Charlie to gain the advantage, but that only destabilized himself. Charlie edged closer. Rourke, arm outstretched as a rogue bludger, hurtled toward him. It was the classic choice, the dangerous bludger on one side, the snitch within reach on the other. The whole stadium held its breath. The golden snitch is right in front of him. Can Charlie catch it? Is Gryffindor going to win? Oh no! Someone stop that damn bludger, Lee cried, voice cracking with tension. He dodged the bludger. He caught it. Charlie Weasley caught the golden snitch. Victory belongs to Gryffindor. Lee shouted in a roar of joy. Charlie rode around with the snitch clipped to his broom as the Gryffindor stands exploded into celebration. Ada felt the thrill and, using a quick, sonorous charm on herself, bellowed, "Weasley is our king!" Her amplified voice cut through the cheers. Professor McGonagall, smiling at Gryffindor's performance, heard it too and showed no displeasure. She seemed delighted by the victory. The chant took on a life of its own. Soon the entire house was shouting, "Weasley is our king!" Marcus Flint saw red. Humiliated by Wood during the match and now forced to watch his arch-rivals revel, he snapped. Grabbing a beater's bat that hadn't been put away, he sent a bludger flying straight at Charlie. The suddenness was shocking. Charlie didn't see it coming. The bludger struck him and he tumbled from his broom, falling toward the pitch. "Merlin, what did Flint do?" Lee Jordan's voice, amplified and horrified, carried over the crowd. The Gryffindor celebrations ground to a stunned silence as everyone watched the scene unfold in disbelief. The stands were in chaos. Professors were holding back students from both houses, keeping them from rushing onto the pitch. In the center of the field, Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall were bent over Charlie Weasley, while the Gryffindor team had formed a protective ring. The twins glared at Marcus Flint with bloodshot eyes. If the other students hadn't been holding them back, they would have stormed forward. The Slytherin players clustered behind Snape, shielding Marcus in their midst. "That's my brother! Let me through!" Percy shouted, shoving past classmates. He looked unlike himself, eyes red, frantic. Normally, he was all propriety and rules. This was the first time Ada had seen him like this. The professors let Percy through, and Ada slipped out after him when no one was looking. Percy charged straight at the Slytherins, as if he meant to kill Flint with his bare hands. But he was small and outnumbered. Confronting 7 players alone would end badly. Ada grabbed him, hauling him back. She wanted to rip Flint's head off with a bat bogey hex herself, but Snape was still there and would never allow it. Still, she couldn't let Marcus walk away unpunished, especially since he hadn't even bothered to pretend remorse. He was smirking, provoking them all the more. Charlie was conscious enough to wake. It felt like ages later. Pale and breathing shallowly, he frowned as the twins and Percy crowded around. "Professor, how is Charlie?" Ada asked, glancing to Professor McGonagall. McGonagall's jaw was set hard. "His ribs are broken," she said. "He'll need to rest. I've informed Madame Pomfrey. She'll see to him." Dumbledore stepped forward. "Severus, Marcus's conduct was inexcusable. I will deduct 50 points from Slytherin. Marcus will serve a month's detention, and he will not be allowed to play while Charlie Weasley is unable to." Snape's sallow face darkened at every word. He left the field in silence with his students. The announcement dispersed the crowd. Everyone drifted away. On the walk back to the castle, Ada trailed behind McGonagall, trying to read the older woman's expression. "You behaved well today," McGonagall said sharply, "not as impulsive as last year." "If Percy and I had rushed in, Fred and George would have followed," Ada said. "We've already lost Charlie. We can't lose any more beaters." "Learning to think before you act means this year wasn't wasted," McGonagall said through gritted teeth. "Go see Charlie yourself afterwards. Leave early and don't wander the castle." Before they parted, the professor added, almost offhand, "I've put together some new transfiguration notes. You may come and look at them when you have time." Ada heard what she needed to hear and left with a plan. In the hospital wing, the twins and Percy sat by Charlie's bed. Charlie wore a chest protector and was managing a wry, pained smile. Ada told them about Dumbledore's penalties. Charlie and Percy accepted the punishment without objection. Fred and George did not. They wanted to send Marcus to the hospital. Charlie noticed their faces. "Fred, George, no," he said firmly. "Don't go after him. When I'm better, I want to beat Slytherin properly. On the pitch. That'll hurt him more." "Got it," the twins muttered, though their eyes were doubtful. Percy, calmer now and back to his textbook manner, nodded and promised to keep an eye on them. He was awkward and officious again, but at least he was steadier. That evening, the common room was muted. Charlie's absence put a damper on any celebrations. Ada sat by the fire with a book in her lap, but she wasn't reading. The Marauders map lay across the pages. She had been watching it all afternoon, waiting for an opportunity. The twins sat opposite, knuckles cracked, ready to pounce when Flint left detention. Flint was in Snape's office for the time being. If nobody collected him, Ada and the twins would have their chance. Percy watched from across the room. As Ada and the twins rose to leave, Percy simply turned his back and didn't stop them. The twins were puzzled. Ada understood. Percy's awkwardness had its own logic. He wouldn't help them be reckless. In Snape's office, Marcus Flint had been reduced to writing lines. "I should not injure people from behind," he scrawled over and over, his hand cramping. Eventually, Snape dismissed him and Flint stalked down the corridor, rubbing his sore wrist, confident he could handle anyone foolish enough to confront him. He rounded a corner and ran straight into the twins. "We've been waiting for you," Fred said, blocking his path. Flint smirked. "Soon you'll be in the hospital wing with your brother," he said, cruel and certain. "You need to apologize to Charlie, Flint," Fred said, "or we can take you there ourselves." "You two are hilarious," Flint sneered. "Is it from lack of food you've lost your wits?" He flicked his wand out. "You'd best put that away if you don't want to get hurt," George warned, nodding behind him. Flint turned and saw Ada standing a few paces back, hands tucked behind her, tapping her foot like she had all the time in the world. Ada was hard to miss. Reputation alone made her memorable. Miss Know-It-All, Gryffindor's notorious point loser, Snape's most aggravating pupil. Flint had never taken her seriously. She was just another 13-year-old girl. What harm could she do? Marcus's spell shot toward them, clumsy and weak. It glanced harmlessly off Ada, barely singing her sleeve. He looked pleased with himself, until Ada lifted her wand with a single casual flick. "That's it," she said, sounding almost bored. She hadn't expected him to be so useless. The hex she sent was precise and immediate. Bogies erupted from Flint's nostrils as if he had inhaled a flock of bats. His face twisted, his hair stood on end, and he began sputtering and hopping as if something most unpleasant had taken residence in his mouth. The twins doubled over laughing. Students peering from nearby doorways laughed too. Ada lowered her wand and said, cool as any prefect, "You attacked me first, Marcus. This is justifiable defense. 91. Revenge never lasts overnight." Ada had dared to confront Marcus Flint because she knew she could handle the hulking Slytherin. She simply hadn't expected him to be this incompetent. There was no satisfaction to be had from revenge. Unable to hold it in, she let out a short laugh. Watching the burly Slytherin now, she felt all the talk about pure-blood families was meaningless. "Flint, is your brain full of muscles?" Fred mocked, clapping his hands as he grinned. Flint's face flushed with fury. His buck teeth seemed to jut out even more. Angry, he sent another spell toward Ada, hotter and a touch stronger than the last. Ada stepped aside. The spell had force, but it missed its mark. Fred might be right. Flint's head was full of muscle and crude tactics, not spellcraft. Ada wondered how he had lasted this long without Snape throttling him for his poor aim. Was Snape merciful? Flint's wand lowered. He couldn't hit Ada at all. He was like a toy gorilla being played with by someone half his size. When spells failed, he would fall back on the most primitive solution. Flint charged, bull-headed and furious. The distance between them was only a few steps. He felt as if running into a wall. His senses went fuzzy. The next thing he knew, he was flat on his back on the cold corridor stone. the twins' laughter echoing in his ears. The fall left him dazed and in pain. When he pushed himself up and looked at Ada again, he saw her standing with a faint smile, arms folded, one finger tapping her forearm casually. Even the slowest-witted bystander could see it now. Flint had picked the wrong person to bully. The twins had done nothing physical the whole time. They'd kept watch and jeered to ensure Flint wouldn't have backup. No matter which way Flint had tried to come at her, he would have run straight into Ada. His fate had been sealed the moment he chose her as his target. Ada hadn't hesitated because she had nothing to fear. Charlie had been hurt, and this was payback. Whatever petty prejudice pure-blood families liked to parade meant nothing to her. She hadn't come close to Flint before, and she didn't mean to let him close now. She remembered how she'd once escaped from the folly, and she wouldn't risk a repeat humiliation. So when Flint lunged, Ada cast a blasting charm that sent him skidding across the floor. Her small frame might be at a disadvantage in a fistfight with a man Flint's size, but she was a witch, and she used magic where muscle would fail. "Is it my turn now?" she said, smiling. "Silencio." Flint opened his mouth and nothing came out. He felt the chill of silence settle over him and tried to push past it, but the charm held. He stumbled toward the twins, hoping Ada would hesitate. She wouldn't hurt them on accident if she loved them at all. He misjudged. "Locomotor mortis?" he cried, but before the legs he'd tried to bind could move, Ada had already acted. His legs snapped together as if gripped by invisible bands, and he fell face first. He protected his head with his hands, but the impact split his lip and blood trickled from his nose. He scrambled to his feet, only to be hit by another spell that lashed across his back like a whip. After that came wave after wave of whip-like strikes. He wanted to scream for help, but the silencing charm had taken his voice. Even if he opened his mouth, sound would not come. The spell Ada used wasn't from the unforgivable curses. It was something she had found in the restricted section. It caused acute pain without leaving marks or killing the victim. The twins shifted uncomfortably as they watched. What looked like a cruelty to them was, to Ada, measured and deliberate. Fred ducked his head, a sudden survivor's instinct making him wonder if he'd been too cheeky. George kept his eyes on the Marauder's map in his hand. If anyone got into real trouble, it would probably be Fred first. George tended to be gentler in his dealings with Ada. The corridor filled with different worries. The twins fretted about whether Ada had gone too far and whether they should apologize preemptively. Flint wanted the whole thing to end. Ada didn't think about it at all. She simply continued until she was satisfied. "Ada, that's enough. Someone's coming," George hissed, glancing at the map. Ada nodded, then walked over and flipped Flint with a flick of her wand so he landed on his back. She crouched and said, "Plumbing after you again. Apologized to Charlie." She didn't wait for a reply. As she stood, she stamped her foot down hard, a final, almost affectionate push that set Flint's teeth back in line. He clutched his mouth, curled up like a shrimp on the stone, and didn't dare watch the three of them walk away. Ada's last words echoed in his ears. "If you want revenge, I accept. If you want to complain, I'll be waiting." On the way back to Gryffindor Tower, the twins worried that Ada might have overstepped. "Do you think that was a bit much?" Fred asked. "You won't be expelled," Ada said nonchalantly. "Detention, possibly." She had been careful. Flint looked humiliated and sore, but his injuries were nothing like Charlie's. Flint would be back on his feet in class tomorrow. If he went to complain, she expected a punishment on par with his. If the ministry tried to protect him simply because he was one of the 28 pure-blood families, and she was Muggle-born, Ada wouldn't hesitate to escalate matters. People pressed hard enough will do surprising things. Since Benedict Fooley had been imprisoned in Azkaban, the Fooley family in Hampshire had been lobbying everywhere to get him out. The pure-blood wizards there, indifferent to the harm Benedict, Ada, and Daniel Bell had caused, seemed to take their superiority for granted. Ada had kept her anger mostly to herself, but the resentment had been building. If she were stronger, she might have gone to Hampshire months ago and confronted them. Dumbledore had asked Mr. Weasley to take Ada home over the summer, probably because he feared retaliation, though it was also possible the other side simply didn't care enough to bother. Either way, Ada was done pretending that being Muggle-born made her invisible. She would not let Charlie's injury stand unanswered. Ada didn't need to tell anyone the thoughts she had been turning over in her head. She only needed to know them herself. Professor McGonagall and Dumbledore would never let her run wild forever. Taking on the Folly family would send shockwaves through the wizarding world, and Dumbledore wouldn't stand for that. Maybe once there had been a woman who could indulge and protect her, but on a snowy night in 1977, that woman had walked away, and no one knew where she had gone. Bloodlines mattered in the wizarding world. The ministry had been around for centuries, and only one minister had been Muggle-born, and he had resigned soon after for health reasons. George's voice cut into Ada's train of thought. It's a pity we didn't get to do it ourselves. I want to pull Flint's teeth out one by one, Fred said, watching Ada with a grin. Ada, what are you thinking about? Snapping back, she replied, Nothing. I just think Flint's performance is a disgrace to so-called pureblood families. I don't know what they're ever proud of. We're the disgrace, said Fred, pointing at himself and George. Flint and his sort are the glory. George snorted. The Weasleys are the self-degrading pureblood family. That's probably why Dad never gets promoted at the ministry. There weren't only 28 pureblood families once upon a time. There were only 28 left. Many old names had died out. Families who had squandered their fortunes, failed to live up to their ancestors, or simply left no heirs. Their estates and burial grounds fell to neglect. The Weasleys might be poor and mocked as a disgrace, but they survived and prospered with descendants. The irony wasn't lost on Ada. If you lot weren't the disgrace, we probably wouldn't be friends, Fred said with a mockingly earnest look. That would be miserable, George added. No one would comfort you when you cried, like moaning Myrtle. They made their way back to the common room and sat in their usual places, talking as if nothing had happened. Have you ever seen me cry? Ada rolled her eyes. Anyone who makes me cry will end up wishing they hadn't. Just don't let Professor McGonagall have you tomorrow, the twins chorused. If the professors found out about what Ada had just done, McGonagall would certainly be furious. The twins suggested the three of them act together. Sharing the blame might soften the blow, but the idea was quickly dropped. With the Quidditch Cup so close, Gryffindor could not afford to lose another beater. Ada had decided to step in after Charlie was hurt. Even if she did nothing, the twins would have gone after Flint sooner or later. It was better that she take responsibility. Charlie had been good to her, after all. Ada had already tested McGonagall's boundaries and believed whatever she'd done fell within the limits McGonagall would tolerate. She even joked about it. Looks like I'll need to order some catnip tomorrow, she quipped, mentally prepared for whatever came. Sunday morning was cold enough that Ada gave up her usual walk by the Black Lake. She took Galleon out instead. The dog was half a year old now, much bigger and still obedient, never causing her worry. At breakfast in the Great Hall, Flint was nowhere to be seen. The Slytherins stared at her with the same cool indifference as always, treating her like air. McGonagall chatted with the other staff at the high table, and Snape didn't even look like he intended to reprimand her. Nothing seemed to have happened. The twins grew more worried. Perhaps Flint had swallowed his pride and kept quiet. Maybe Ada wouldn't be punished after all. They kicked themselves for not joining in the revenge the day before. If they had, Flint likely wouldn't have dared tell the professors. At noon, Flint reappeared, escorted by a few Slytherins, his mouth wrapped in a white and green scarf. He walked into the hall with a sullen expression, avoided looking at the Gryffindors, and sat down in silence. He ate slowly and said nothing the whole time. In the afternoon, the three of them went to the hospital wing to see Charlie. He was propped up with a book about dragons. The cover showed a horned beast breathing fire. "You're here," Charlie said, putting the book down and patting the empty bed. "You didn't cause any trouble, did you?" "If we'd caused trouble, would we be here?" Fred asked, flopping down on the spare cot. "We'd be hiding from you, not coming to get scolded." George took the bedside chair. Ada sat and idly thumbed through Charlie's dragon book. "So you read this over the holidays. No wonder Hagrid likes you so much." "We've got a lot in common where dragons are concerned," Charlie said quietly. Hagrid keeps trying to bribe me to help him raise one, any kind." He spoke softly. Broken ribs made it painful to be loud. Ada knew Hagrid's fascination with large and dangerous creatures. The Forbidden Forest couldn't hold an adult dragon anyway. Last time she'd been in the forest, she hadn't seen Aragog in person, but she could judge his size by his offspring. "That's why I talked Hagrid out of the more ambitious plans," Charlie said. "I want to go to Romania after I graduate." George blinked. "You told Mum?" "Not yet. I'll talk to Dad at Christmas," Charlie smiled. "Bill went to Egypt. I'll go to Romania. Percy'll be the one left at home. If you two make Mum angry, I'll fly back from Romania on a dragon and roast you both," Charlie warned, and they all laughed. They traded family stories, mostly Charlie recalling the twins' mischief. Once, the twins had tricked Ron into making an unbreakable vow. When Mr. Weasley found out, he'd been furious and given them a sound spanking. Fred always joked that one side of his backside had never quite been the same since. Ada glanced, but there was nothing to see under his robes. Fred turned away to block her view with a practiced hand. They didn't stay long. As they were leaving, Ada asked casually, "Did anyone visit you this morning?" Charlie seemed puzzled but answered, "Percy came, and Rupert too." Ada nodded, and they left the hospital wing. Once she was gone, Charlie sat up a little straighter, realization dawning on him. Ada had asked because she suspected the three of them had been involved in something, and that was why she'd checked. The trouble with Flint had died down, and he hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Perhaps he was too proud to admit he'd been bested by a second-year girl. Not apologizing to Charlie Weasley was probably his last stubborn gesture. Still, the episode hadn't been all bad for Flint. His buck teeth were much smaller afterward, a free bit of cosmetic surgery. Ada's aim had been simple: teach Flint a lesson and stand up for Charlie. Reborn into this life, she wasn't going to accept being weak. Those platitudes about being magnanimous or forgiving because it makes you stronger were nonsense to her. Forgiveness might be Merlin's business. Ada was simply the ferryman. There was no need to destroy Flint. He hadn't done enough to warrant meeting Merlin, just enough of a lesson to keep him in line. If she had gone further, Professor McGonagall would have been sure to intervene. McGonagall had, in fact, predicted much of what followed. She had known Ada would retaliate and that she could stop her only for a short while, not for the entire school year. Since she could not prevent the incident, McGonagall had limited its fallout. In the end, she was satisfied with the outcome and even awarded Ada 5 points in Transfiguration. That gesture felt like a rare favor. The last time Ada had received 5 points from McGonagall had been a year earlier, in their first Transfiguration class. When class ended, McGonagall gave her something else too, a set of Transfiguration notes personally compiled by the professor. For a long moment afterward, the two of them, the old woman and the girl, stayed in the empty classroom without speaking. There was an understanding in that silence. McGonagall's tacit approval was clear. Professor Snape's behavior, on the other hand, left Ada baffled. He did nothing. Not only did he make no trouble for her in potions, but he didn't change the November tutoring schedule either. Ada couldn't believe the head of Slytherin hadn't noticed something. Last year, he'd known when she was wandering the castle, so how could he miss that Flint had been taught a lesson? It didn't make sense, yet it was the situation. Snape showed no reaction, and Ada was left to enjoy a comfortable, untroubled stretch of school. While Ada relaxed, the twins were miserable. With Charlie in the hospital, Gryffindor's training had fallen to Vice Captain Oliver Wood, who was notorious for his severity. Wood roared through practice, angry at missed passes, at sloppy formations, at the chaos the twins made of everything. Angelina and Alicia got scolded as much as anyone. On the day before the Hufflepuff match, he even held the team before dawn to go over tactics. Still, despite all Wood's efforts, Gryffindor lost. Charlie's absence had left a hole they couldn't fill. Their substitute chaser couldn't compete with Cedric Diggory, and Cedric, in a display of individual brilliance, caught the golden snitch. A seeker's catch is worth 150 points. In a tight game, a single person can change the entire match. Cedric's catch turned the score around and handed Hufflepuff an upset victory. The team returned from the pitch exhausted and daunted. Even the twins, who usually shrugged things off, looked crestfallen. Wood, who had been pacing like a caged animal before the match, did his best to hide his disappointment and rally the players, though comforting people was not his strong suit. The gloom didn't last long, because Slytherin lost too, running into Ravenclaw with an equally incomplete lineup. 2 successive losses dropped Slytherin to last place in the Quidditch Cup race. That brightened Gryffindor's spirits. The prospect of Slytherin stumbling soothed some of their pain. Best of all, Charlie was discharged from the hospital at the perfect time. Not too early, not too late. With him back, Gryffindor training returned to normal. Wood's early morning tirades became less frequent, and the team, refocused, set their sights on winning the next match. Ada didn't go to practice. She was busy with other pursuits, books from the restricted section. Now that she had permission, she was reading as much as she could, as fast as she could. In her first year, she'd been too young for a professor's signature. McGonagall had thought the restricted section inappropriate for someone so young, and Ada had even gotten points docked for sneaking in. This year, she no longer needed to sneak. She had a signed note and could hand it to Madame Pince and walk in openly. All of her signatures came from the same professor. Not McGonagall, but Glover Cecil, the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher who liked to prod Ada in class and reward her with points. Cecil would sign anything she handed him without hesitation. He didn't seem to care which books she borrowed. He had a soft spot for her, answering questions after class, discussing dark topics she approached only from an intellectual angle, and always encouraging her curiosity. If Dumbledore had not forbidden him from demonstrating dark arts at school, Cecil would happily have shown her their terrifying potential. Ada understood why dark arts were tempting: power. But Cecil had been a living example of the cost. Dark magic drew on strong negative emotions. The stronger the anger or hatred, the more devastating the effects. Prolonged exposure to such emotions could break a person. Ada didn't want to be dominated by that kind of negativity. She treated dark arts as something to study and understand, not something to cultivate. And seeing what it had done to Cecil put that choice beyond doubt. If she had asked him directly to teach her, he would have obliged and likely told her everything he knew. The white-bearded, pipe-smoking man doted on her to an extent that puzzled her. She and the twins had talked about it often and had no explanation. Whatever his reasons, his favoritism had practical benefits. Cecil had helped her a great deal, both in her studies and in day-to-day matters. And for now, that help was more than enough. 94. Black magic successor outside, heavy snow fell, and the world had been reduced to a blanket of white. No one wanted to venture out in that weather. Even the twins were curled up in the warm common room. The circular room was dotted with clusters of students, groups of 3 or 5, talking and laughing. The best spot by the fireplace was already taken, so the twins settled into a corner. They were busy taking apart and examining a Dr. Filibuster's firework, trying to figure out how the little magical device ignited on its own and bloomed when it got wet. If they mastered its mechanism, they planned to reproduce it. Ada had lit a spark under them. Even at school, they should be thinking about the future, building experience, and a little startup capital. Selling maps at the start of term had padded their purses, and without that money, they wouldn't have bothered dismantling an expensive firework. As long as they didn't waste it betting on how long the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor would last, it would see them through a while. Ada returned to the common room early, her backpack weighing her down. The library had turned into a makeshift matchmaking spot, more couples entwined than students reading, and she had had enough of the atmosphere and the occasional cringeworthy sounds. Glancing around, she saw the twins in the corner and walked over. They were so absorbed in their work that they didn't notice her until she cleared her throat. George reached out to take Ada's backpack and nearly toppled under its weight. "What have you got in here? Why is it so heavy?" he complained. "Did you pack the entire library?" "I wish," Ada muttered, "but it feels like I did." If she could carry the library, she wouldn't have had to endure what she'd just seen. Fred slid the firework parts aside. "Why are you back so early?" Ada rolled her eyes. Outside is a snowy winter, and the library is a scene of spring. At first, the twins didn't get what she meant, but then their grins told her they understood. She'd left because the library had become a lover's haven and she'd been fed up with it. George fingered a thick book sticking out of Ada's pack, so dense it looked better suited for clouting someone than for studying. "What's this?" "It's a book," Ada said. "Lethal potions. Most of the potions in this book can kill a person." "Was this another of Cecil's suggestions?" Fred asked, and the twins traded a look. Fred opened the book and read the first line aloud. "Is every sip of water you drink, every bite of food you eat safe?" He skimmed a few pages and grimaced. "No wonder it's in the restricted section." "So who else would recommend such a dangerous book to you?" George said. "Only Cecil." Ada nodded. She had taken the book to broaden her potions knowledge. She wanted tools to deal with Snape. "When there's oppression, there's resistance," the twins said in unison. "Are you really going to go after Snape?" Ada gave each of them a knuckle rap. "Are you trying to get me sent to Azkaban?" "Just like your grandfather did," Fred taunted. "A grandfather?" Ada blinked. She hadn't known she even had one. "Glover Cecil," George explained. "Maybe the old man is lonely and wants you as a granddaughter, an heir to his interests." From Hogwarts to Azkaban, from enrollment to imprisonment in 2 years, Ada supposed that would be an impressive family legacy. The twins kept teasing her, and she batted them away as they joked about Cecil pushing her toward the dark arts. Their teasing was pointed. Beneath the jokes, they were warning her to be careful. Cecil's coaxing, his history with Azkaban, looked suspicious. Few people who dabbled in dark magic had good endings. "Are we witnessing the rise of the next Dark Lord?" George mock bowed, dropping to one knee. "My lady, I am your most loyal servant. May I kiss the hem of your robe?" They teased until Ada pushed George's forehead and sent him sprawling on the carpet. Laughter followed, Fred and Ada in armchairs, George on the floor, warming the room more effectively than the fire. "Tomorrow's Hogsmeade, right?" Ada asked, hauling George up. He tried to pull her from her seat, but when she let go, he sank back down with a thump. Hogsmeade was the pure wizarding village near school, the only one in Britain, and the students could only visit it on certain Saturdays with written permission from a guardian. Ada and the twins weren't supposed to go, but they'd been before, via a secret passage. "Perfect," George said. "We want to go to Zonko's for a restock. Dung bombs are on the list." Ada could never see the appeal of magical stink bombs. Wouldn't homemade rotten eggs be just as effective and cheaper? The twins loved to prank Filch with dung bombs. Whenever they did, the castle smelled for days. Ada pictured them as 2 misbehaving boys and shook her head. "I've got a lot to buy," Ada warned. "You two are carrying my bags." The twins sank back into the armchairs with dramatic sighs. Shopping, it seemed, was a universal truth, even for a 13-year-old witch. "I'll buy the butterbeer," Ada added. 95. Hogsmeade's snow had fallen heavily through the night. Looking out the window, Hogwarts and the distant mountains, all dressed in white, looked like something out of a fairy tale. Only this tale had no wicked queen or gentle Snow White, only a noseless old man and a scarred boy. While Ada was still having breakfast with Fred and George in the Great Hall, many of the older students were already gathered in the entrance hall. Once they'd queued and their permission slips were checked, they could go into snow-covered Hogsmeade. Ada set down her warm vegetable soup and followed the twins out. The queue was inching forward, and Professor McGonagall, in an emerald green robe, was diligently checking signatures. The twins called to Ada from the stairs, and she followed them up. Halfway down the 4th-floor corridor, by the statue of the one-eyed witch, George consulted the Marauder's map, then nodded to Fred. Fred drew his wand, tapped the statue, and muttered, "Finite incantatem." The witch's hump opened, revealing a hole just big enough for a slim person to squeeze through. Fred led the way, Ada followed, and George took one last look at the map before tucking it away and slipping through after them. They slid down a long stone stair and then dropped onto muddy ground, hit by cold, damp air. Ada pulled her cloak tighter and adjusted her red earmuffs, Mrs. Weasley's birthday gift, very warm. After a quick tidy, they pushed on. They threaded a passage like a giant rabbit warren until they reached the bottom of a dilapidated stone stair. Higher up, a trapdoor marked their exit. Fred nudged it open and peered out into the cellar. Ambrosius Flume, the broad-bodied, bald owner of Honeydukes, was moving stock and didn't notice the opening. Once he left, the three slipped out and melted into a crowd of customers. Honeyduke's was full of chocolates and magical sweets, beloved by Hogwarts students and staff. The air was thick with the smell of confections. Ada thought it must be Dumbledore's paradise. She took a few chocolates and candies from the shelves. Flume, with his thinning hair, glanced her way. The sight made her think of Mr. Weasley and his own hairline, and in the back of her mind, she worried about Fred and George's flaming red heads in this strange, small world. Leaving Honeyduke's, they walked through the picturesque village. The cottages and shops looked even lovelier under their blanket of snow. Hogsmeade was usually busy, and with Hogwarts students out for the day, the streets were especially crowded. There were fewer people in Scrivenshaft's quill shop. The twins thought the shop dull compared to the rest of the village. Ada took her time choosing from the shelves and finally steeled herself to buy 2 quills for 14 sickles. The twins' footsteps grew lighter as they left Scrivenshaft's, though Ada noticed a constant jingle as they walked, shopping bags full of purchases. They passed Madame Putafoot's tea shop, where couples squeezed into the tiny, cluttered room. A sickly sweet smell drifted out whenever the door opened. The lace curtains and syrupy air put Ada off visiting. The twins only came alive when they reached Zonko's joke shop. They lingered among the shelves, counting coins and plotting how to buy as much mischief as possible. Ada wasn't interested in dung bombs, but she was tempted by frog-spawn soap and nose-biting teacups. She imagined how amusing it would be to give them to Professor Snape and whether a teacup would still dare bite his nose. The twins bought a pile of things, far more than Ada's modest haul, and left the shop satisfied. "Shall we go to the Three Broomsticks to warm up?" Ada suggested. The Three Broomsticks was a small, cozy pub frequented by Hogwarts folk, perfect for butterbeer. A striking, curvaceous woman stood in the doorway, Madame Rosmerta, the owner. Compared to Tom from the Leaky Cauldron, she was like night and day, beautiful, charismatic, and clearly used to attention. To many of the schoolboys, she was part hostess, part confidante, the kind of grown woman who made the Three Broomsticks worth a visit simply to exchange a few words. "No," the twins replied in unison, shaking their heads. "We can see Madame Rosmerta next time. Today we're going somewhere else," George said, still glancing back at the Three Broomsticks. "The Hog's Head. Hagrid says there are all sorts of interesting people there." Ada sighed inwardly and led them down a side street toward the Hog's Head. The pub lived up to its name. A faded wooden sign hung from a rusty bracket above the door, showing a severed boar's head with blood soaking a white cloth. The sign creaked in the wind. "Are you sure?" Ada asked. "I'd rather go to Rosmerta's." "We're sure," Fred said and pushed the door open. Inside, the Hog's Head was small, dark, and grimy. Sunlight was blocked by thick, streaked grime on the windows. The only light came from candles on the tables. The room smelled of spilled ale and old wood, and most of the patrons kept their faces turned away. The owner stood behind the bar, wiping a glass with a filthy rag, somehow making it dirtier with every swipe. He was tall and thin with a long mane of gray hair and a matching beard, and his expression was not welcoming. "What'll it be?" he asked, blunt and unfriendly. "3 butterbeers, please," Fred said. The owner reached beneath the counter and produced 3 dusty bottles. Ada paid 6 sickles, but she had trouble handling the beers. The bottles were so filthy there was nowhere clean to grip. She pinched a cap between thumb and forefinger, grimaced, lifted the bottle, and moved to a corner table that looked least awful. "It's filthy in here," Ada whispered. It felt rude to complain in someone's pub, but she couldn't help it. "That's why we came prepared," Fred said, raising an eyebrow. George, as if unveiling a treasure, produced from his robe the things they'd brought along. Inside the dingy, dim pub, Ada sat with the Weasley twins. She scowled at the dusty bottles of butterbeer on the table. Her dislike was plain to see. George produced something the twins had prepared earlier, 3 clean cups. Suddenly, Ada understood why the twins' pockets had jingled when they walked. They'd been hiding the cups. Wiping the bottle rim with his sleeve, Ada poured butterbeer into the cups. Luckily, only the outside of the bottles was filthy. The drink itself was perfectly fine. The twins took eager sips, faces bright. They kept an eye on the other patrons, but did it discreetly so as not to irritate anyone. The pub door opened with a draft, and 4 figures wrapped in heavy cloaks came in, faces concealed. Concealing one's appearance was common in this place. Only newcomers like Ada and her companions tended to arrive more openly. Voices around them were low and indistinct, impossible to overhear. The twins didn't spot anyone interesting to satisfy their curiosity either. "You were right, we should have gone to the 3 broomsticks," Fred said dejectedly. "Yeah, it'd at least be warmer there," George added, tightening his cloak. "And Madame Rosmerta." "Madame Rosmerta's not for you lot," Ada said, rolling her large eyes so the motion was obvious. Fred noticed but pretended not to care. He eyed Ada and said with a hint of envy, "Green fruit always envies ripe peaches." "Green fruit?" Ada asked, raising her cup casually. "Nothing. I just envy whoever's got whiskey," Fred muttered, and sensibly let the comment die there. Better to avoid a butterbeer bath and the threat of a diffindo. "We didn't expect the Hog's Head to be like this. Hagrid said it was interesting," George said, trying to change the subject. Hagrid's recommendation had been the reason they came at all. The twins had not stopped to consider that Hagrid was an adult who knew how to enjoy the Hog's Head's peculiar charms. The twins lacked that experience, so the place held little appeal for them. "Where are we going now?" Ada asked. "Back to Hogwarts?" "We finally got out to play. Must you always think about books?" Fred teased. "Or do you want to study your way into Azkaban?" From a Hogwarts common room to a stint in Azkaban, that was a steep jump, even for the twins, brand of banter. They left the Hog's Head and walked through Hogsmeade toward the Shrieking Shack. They had been there before, once at night, but had never actually heard it shriek. The shack was an old, abandoned house long rumored to be haunted after villagers claimed to hear terrifying screams from within. Those stories had spread until the shack earned a fearsome reputation across Britain. Britain wasn't a large place, but ghost stories were endless. Ada remembered the strange disturbances in the Enfield district of North London when she was born, where furniture seemed to move on its own until the homeowner, terrified, called in a medium. In truth, the commotion had been caused by a wandering wizard who wanted the place cleared out. He left when things escalated, not because the medium had succeeded. Another famous haunted place was the Tower of London, where Muggles claimed to see ghosts, most famously Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII's second queen had been accused of treason and adultery, imprisoned in the tower, and executed with a longsword in 1536. Rumor said her ghost in a white gown wandered the tower, and that, near the anniversary of her death, she rode back to her birthplace at Blickling Hall, with her head tucked under her arm. Ada wasn't sure of all the facts behind Anne's fate, but she liked to think there had been more to it, and in her own mind, she counted Anne among those who'd wielded strange power. Her portrait still hung in Hogwarts. Ada even thought of asking Sir Patrick Delaney Podmore, since they had both been beheaded in their histories, if he had ever seen Anne's ghost. Many of the hauntings Muggles worried about, of course, were caused by wizards. The Shrieking Shack, however, had never had its mystery satisfactorily explained in public, which made it all the more frightening to wizards who passed on the tale. Outside the shack's rusting fence, Ada and the twins joined a scattering of other curious students and local folk. The house's doors and windows had been sealed long ago. A fence kept visitors at a safe distance. From the outside, the place looked merely dilapidated rather than menacing. It wasn't an ancient castle soaked in death, nor a noble's manor with a grim history. The shack's shabby appearance hardly matched its infamous name. After waiting a time, the crowd's patience thinned and people began to drift away. No bone-chilling screams had pierced the air. "This place doesn't look haunted at all," Ada said, leaning on the railing. She wanted, very much, to draw her wand and cast Diffindo or Confringo to blast the seals and go inside to investigate. "It frightened a lot of people back then," Fred said, picking up a compact stone from the snow and flinging it at the shack. The stone glanced off the boards with a muted thud. Nothing happened. "When was back then?" Ada asked, tilting her head. Hogsmeade had been founded around the same time as Hogwarts. In 1612, it had even served as a center during the Goblin Rebellion. She wondered when exactly the Shrieking Shack's legend had first begun. The twins exchanged the same look. "You ask us? Aren't you Miss Know-It-All?" Then shrugged. When we get back, I'll see what I can find about it, Ada promised, curiosity flaring. Then we'll go in and catch the ghost. How's that? Interest suddenly lit their faces. The three of them bumped hands in a quick high five. The long-abandoned shack was about to receive an unexpected visit. 97. Familiar taste. True to her nature, Ada never procrastinated. The moment she returned from Hogsmeade, she dove straight into the library, digging up everything she could find about the village. Hogsmeade, a settlement of only witches and wizards, had a long history. Its first resident was Hangis, who came to live in seclusion to escape centuries of Muggle fear and persecution, an era when Muggles viewed magic as devilry and witch hunts were common. Some wizards met Muggle reprisals with defiance or even amusement, but many were killed. Over time, other witches and wizards followed Hangis, and the little community slowly grew into the Hogsmeade everyone knew. The most famous event in Hogsmeade's past was the Goblin Rebellion of 1612. A small village tavern served as the rebels' command center. The uprising itself had been sparked by long-standing wizard prejudice and mistreatment of goblins. Such revolts were not unusual across the 17th and 18th centuries, and even now many radical goblins resist the ministry's decrees and demand equal treatment. Ada read all the usual sources: history of magic, historical sites, Hogwarts, a school history, and others, but none mentioned the Shrieking Shack. The shack's story seemed to live only in oral tradition among the villagers. If the book said nothing, she would have to ask people. She quizzed several senior students and professors in the library, even brought the question to Professor Cecil, but got no concrete answers. When the living could not help, she turned to the dead. Sir Patrick Delaney Podmore, the Gryffindor ghost, was easy enough to find. He was lingering by the portrait of Anne Boleyn. As a spirit of many centuries, Sir Patrick could only offer a vague estimate. The rumors about the Shrieking Shack were not very old, perhaps a few decades, maybe 100 years. Ghosts, he admitted, rarely kept precise dates in mind. Aside from the anniversary of their own deaths, their memories blurred. And of course, stories that pass by word of mouth always drift away from the truth the more they're told. Still, the time frame helped. Ada at least no longer had to wander the library like a headless hen. By then, Hogwarts had slid into December. Damp cold made mornings brutal. The castle seemed to conspire to keep students in their beds. One bright afternoon, Ada decided to escape the stacks for a while and go for a walk. The snow crunched beneath her boots with a crisp creak, and sunlight turned the black lake into a sheet of glass and silver. The distant mountains and the wide, dark water always calmed her. It was a fine place to think. The cold had driven most couples away, so the shore was nearly empty. From where she stood, the snow-dusted peaks looked like elderly white-haired watchers, and, unknown to Ada, a white-haired man was indeed watching her from nearby. "Tryst, did you not bring a book today?" Professor Cecil approached with his hands behind his back. He looked paler than usual, a little sickly. He'd always been kind to Ada, but he rarely used her familiar name, never Esmeralda, she thought, preferring to address her by her surname, which made his use of Tryst oddly intimate. "It's awkward to turn the pages with gloves on," Ada said, wiggling at the thick gloves that had come with her earmuffs. "I never liked this weather when I was a student, and I loathe it even more now that I'm old," Professor Cecil grumbled, clear disdain in his voice. "You don't look well, Professor. Are you ill?" Ada asked. His face was unusually pale. Cecil touched his cheek and smiled wryly. "Scary, isn't it? Getting old brings all sorts of ailments. Even the most powerful magic can't stop time. Time could teach and time could betray." The subject hung heavy between them for a moment. Neither spoke. Cecil then produced a small flask from his robe, uncorked it, and took an exaggerated sip. His face crumpled. Whatever was inside did not taste pleasant. "By the way," he said, suddenly brighter, "have you found anything about the Shrieking Shack?" The color came back to his cheeks and his tone lifted. Ada caught a scent on the air from the flask that felt oddly familiar, though she pushed the thought aside as the cold could have played tricks on her nose. "I've heard many flavors of ghost stories. Every kind of rumor," Ada replied. "Probably nobody knows more about the Shack's legends than I do now. But they're all just rumors without hard facts. Our world is full of strange tales. Some are lies, some half-truths, Cecil said. We must sift the false from the true, and from the half-truths extract what really happened. It sounded like a detective story, and for a moment Ada imagined she was not by the Black Lake at Hogwarts, but walking the foggy streets of Baker Street in London. She liked the idea of the process, but she preferred the result. If she could, she'd rather enjoy someone else's hard work than do the digging herself. The Weasley twins were reliable in many things, but this was beyond them. Ada would have to do it herself. For now, I prefer the result, she said frankly. Searching is always tiresome. Besides these hearsay tales, I found nothing. To know the truth, I'll have to go there myself. Cecil did not reply immediately. He aimed his wand at the frozen lake and released a thick, black beam of light. The ice and snow shattered where it struck, and a column of water blasted up 2 or 3 stories high, arching out and falling back into the lake, yet not a single drop splashed the two of them standing on the shore. Ada felt a jolt of admiration and envy at his control. She wondered when she would be able to perform such a feat. When you can do things like that, the results will come to you, Cecil said, taking another sip from his flask. Then you'll enjoy the process, because it won't be a struggle anymore. He turned and walked away slowly, each step seeming to require effort. His stooped figure made him look, for a moment, less like a formidable figure from darker times and more like an elderly man burdened by age. Ada watched his retreating back, curiosity deepening. The flask's scent lingered in the air, a familiar, slightly acrid tang that made her think of Snape's dim little potion room. 98. Holiday. As the Christmas holidays approached, the festive spirit in the castle grew stronger. Under Angelina's direction, Ada led the decorating of the dormitory. After all, Angelina insisted, Ada had the highest magic level. If Ada didn't do the decorations, who would? Holly garlands festooned the room, and Ada strung up colorful lights that could transform into tiny flying fairies, fluttering their wings and drifting about the dormitory. Whether it was Professor Flitwick's generosity or his fondness for Christmas, the school decorations were once again overseen by him this year. The little fairy lights Ada used were his handiwork. Older students helped too, though everyone had to be wary of Peeves. The poltergeist might shake a ladder as someone climbed, wrap a ribbon around a neck to give someone a fright, or, of course, launch water balloons. Professors decorated their own classrooms as well, each reflecting the teacher's personality. They also ran end-of-semester reviews, going over the material from the first half of the term. Some professors, however, left their classrooms untouched. Professor Snape's dungeon would have seemed just as dim with garlands as without, and Ada would have felt oddly out of place if holly had hung from the stone rafters, almost tempted to light an incense and leave. Snape did, for once, make a dark joke when he said he'd be sending a certain student a poison for Christmas, and hoped whoever it was had been paying attention in class so they wouldn't be killed by it. The remark sent a ripple through the room. Everyone glanced at Ada, virtually certain, 99.99%, that she was the intended target. Professor Glover Cecil also left his classroom bare. Perhaps the season felt too cruel for him. Since Ada had noticed the anomaly by the Black Lake, she'd watched Cecil closely and found his health indeed worrying. The man who had once always had a cigarette in hand no longer sat by a window to smoke before class, and outside of practical lessons he rarely used his wand. Filch, convinced students became more careless as the holidays approached, patrolled the corridors even more frequently. He kept a closer eye on Peeves, who had become so infuriating that both humans and dogs seemed to hate him. Prefects from each house helped Filch keep order as well, a duty Charlie grumbled about, complaining about Filch's interference. At breakfast, Professor McGonagall collected lists of the students staying at Hogwarts over the holidays. Ada had decided not to stay. She was going to the Burrow with the Weasley twins. That had been settled over the summer, and this month she'd received a letter from Mrs. Weasley, who fretted that Ada might be too shy to impose on the family and would skip Christmas as she had last year. Mrs. Weasley even instructed her 4 sons to tie Ada up and bring her home if she refused. Poor Errol, their battered old owl, had once more been sent out into wind and snow to fly from Ottery St. Catchpole to Scotland, an exhausting trip for such an elderly bird. At last, the semester ended, and Ada left Hogwarts with the Weasley brothers. Once the students were gone, the castle grew quiet. Ada couldn't practice magic over the holidays, but she could enjoy a restful break. Night in Ottery St. Catchpole was peaceful. In the village square, a Christmas tree hung golden bells, and colored lights made the place glow. On the country lane outside the village, lit by pinpricks of starlight, Mr. Weasley and Charlie walked ahead, talking quietly, perhaps about Romania. Percy and Ron followed with heads bowed. The twins lugged suitcases and shot mischievous looks at Percy. He was likely to be the target of more of their pranks this holiday. Ada walked at the rear, hand in Ginny's. The now-grown family dog Galleon ran ahead to wag at Mr. Weasley and then hurried back to Ada's side. The lane was no longer large enough for all his antics. The burrow hadn't changed since they left, the same cozy, slightly chaotic house. Weasley stood at the door, waiting, the kitchen having been busy all afternoon preparing a table laden with food. She greeted every child with a smile and a hug. When she hugged Ada, her grin widened. "My dear, I'm so glad to see you back," she said. "I'd have forced my way in if you hadn't let me," Ada replied with a smile. "This is your home, always," Mrs. Weasley said, stroking Ada's shoulders. "My dear, you've lost weight since the summer." Although nothing particularly alarming had happened to Ada during the term, she had lost weight. She had tumbled in the underground practice room almost every day, and after so much exertion, it was hard not to slim down. Ada, who had become adept at treating injuries from all those falls, was already very good at fixing sprains and bruises. If she took to herbology, she might even be suited to try working at St. Mungo's in the future. "Is there smoked bacon?" Ada asked, tilting her head as the smell of food reached her. "Of course. Your favorite," Mrs. Weasley said, rubbing Ada's cheek. "Go upstairs and put your luggage away, and we'll eat." The twins had already carried Ada's suitcase to Ginny's room, although it remained unpacked. Since the twins were around, Ada rarely hauled her own things. She'd been indulged into letting them carry them. Inside were only a few changes of clothes, holiday homework, and leisure books to pass the time. Downstairs, the living room was its usual bustle. Fred and George had slipped a box into Percy's suitcase. The battle-hardened, Percy didn't fall for their trick. He carried the box straight downstairs, ready to confront the twins. The twins, for their part, denied everything and claimed it was a gift from Percy's girlfriend, urging him to open it. As far as Ada knew, Percy wasn't seeing anyone, so the girlfriend story was thin. If anything, they might have tried to say it was from an admirer. Mr. Weasley sat on the sofa with a newspaper, smiling indulgently at the commotion. Charlie watched from the side, enjoying the spectacle with his younger siblings. When Mrs. Weasley finally called everyone to the table, the brothers' antics ceased, and they gathered for their first meal back at the burrow. On the family clock, with its hands labeled for each Weasley, every hand pointed to home, except Bill's. Early the next morning, the ghoul in the attic woke everyone up. It always made a racket whenever the Weasleys grew quiet, screaming or banging on the pipes, because as long as the ghoul thought the house was too peaceful, no one could get any rest. Ada, hair loose and tousled, yawned as she came downstairs. Her clothes were tidy, but the little mirror on the kitchen mantelpiece was already complaining. "Comb your hair! What a mess!" Mrs. Weasley was busy in the kitchen. Cups, bowls, plates, and cutlery were washing themselves in the sink, clinking together like a small orchestra. Hearing the mirror's reprimand, Mrs. Weasley glanced up and smiled. "Were you woken, my dear?" "Good morning, Mrs. Weasley." Ada gathered her hair into a bun, exposing her pale, slender neck. At the orphanage, only the youngest girls had their hair done for them. Older girls managed their own, and no one had taught them fancy styles. Ada rarely bothered with her hair, usually letting it fall loose, sometimes tying a single ponytail, or, like today, a simple bun. She spent her time buried in books. It was only her natural looks that kept people from labeling her a complete bookworm. When the eggs and bacon were ready, Mrs. Weasley piled them on Ada's plate until it formed a small mountain. If Ada hadn't intervened, Mrs. Weasley would have kept heaping it on. Ada had intended to go to Ottery St. Catchpole after breakfast to post a letter to Mrs. Mary, but Mrs. Weasley assured her the village post office would do. The villagers were already up by then, and their curious stares at the stranger were no surprise. Christmas was coming, and many assumed she was some kind of performer. Several children clustered about and, bolder than the rest, asked whether she was an actress from town and what show there would be for Christmas. Annoyed, Ada slipped away into the post office. It was a tiny place with only one clerk. She arrived just in time because the postman was about to set off. Back at the burrow, Ginny was bustling with Mrs. Weasley in the kitchen, while the boys decorated the house with Mr. Weasley. A Christmas tree had been brought in and was being festooned with bells and ribbons. Ada stood at the sink, peeling potatoes with a small knife, feeling a twinge of envy for Charlie because he could use magic outside of school. Ada had to keep her own magic hidden from Mrs. Weasley, so everything she did had to look perfectly normal. With many hands, the burrow was transformed in a morning and smelled of pine and mince pies. The house positively breathed Christmas. Mrs. Weasley let the children go out that afternoon to play so long as they weren't seen by muggles. The boys grabbed their broomsticks, and Ada and Ginny followed. They walked up to a Weasley paddock on the hill, ringed by trees so they wouldn't be spotted by the villagers below. All the older brothers rode Cleansweep brooms, except Ron, who still had a slower model. The twins used Cleansweep 5s, old, battered, but reliable. Ada had no broom of her own, so Charlie fetched one from the broom shed. Ginny wanted one too, but the others argued against it. Charlie was first to mount and lift off. The rest rose into the air and began tossing an apple between them. They weren't playing full Quidditch. That would have drawn too much attention. They kept low and kept it casual. The 7 of them had played this game since they were little. Even Ron managed the apple well enough, although his broom was sluggish and made him look less graceful than the others. Ada, hurry up, don't dally, Fred urged. Everyone knew she wasn't much of a flyer. Percy and Ron egged her on too, eager to see the famously graceful Ada make a fool of herself. She was expected to disappoint, but she didn't. Go on, Ada, Ginny called softly and stepped aside. Ada swung her leg over the broom and pushed off. The broom rose steadily. The boys stared in disbelief. The twins' mouths dropped open. They had spent so much time around Ada that they'd forgotten how far she'd come. In her first year, she couldn't even fly without wobbling. Now she handled the broom like anyone else, maybe a touch slower and more cautious, but competent. Her inclusion made the apple toss more awkward at first. Ada's catches and throws weren't as precise, and sometimes the apple sailed wide. If Charlie hadn't been quick, there would have been a smashed apple by now. He paused the game and reshuffled the teams. The twins and Ada on one side, Charlie with Percy and Ron on the other. 3 against 3, strength evened out. On the twins' side, Ada was their weak link. On Charlie's, neither Ron nor Percy was as skilled as the older brothers. The twins put Ada in the middle so both brothers could help if she fumbled. As the game continued, Ada relaxed into it and began catching the apple more often. She still wasn't a chaser, but she fit in. By the time the sun dipped and they climbed down the hill toward home, everyone had worked up an appetite and rosy cheeks. "When did you get so good at flying?" George asked. If anyone else had been asked that, it would have been a tease, but saying it to Ada was almost a compliment. Her starting point had been so low. Fred and Charlie looked at her with equal curiosity. They all remembered how terrible she had been in first year. Ada merely smiled. She couldn't tell them about the system that helped her learn. Some things had to stay secret. "I've told Fred and George before," she said lightly. "I pick things up quickly." George and Fred flinched, remembering how Ada had once beaten them at exploding snap in first year, a humiliation that had wounded both their pride and their sense of cleverness. "How about a round tonight?" Charlie suggested. "Ada, don't worry, I won't go easy on you." The twins shook their heads as if to ward off disaster, but Charlie, confident in his own card skills, still challenged her. A fierce battle over exploding snap looked inevitable. 100, Christmas butterfly. Christmas morning finally arrived, cold and white with snow. The twins were woken early by Ada, already dressed, who casually tossed 2 boxes to them. She threw open the heavy winter curtains and sunlight poured into the room. The half-awake twins had to pull their blankets over their heads to block the glare. "Merry Christmas," Ada said. "I just walked galleon, so my hands are freezing. Do you two need help?" The twins sat bolt upright, anything to avoid the shock of icy fingers. "Merry Christmas," Fred called, shaking his gift box. "What's this?" "Open it and you'll see," Ada replied, leaving the room. "Hurry and get ready to come downstairs. If you dawdle any longer, Mrs. Weasley will be coming up." Ada was delighted with this holiday. The gifts she woke to were equally pleasing. Professor McGonagall had sent robes, clearly well made from their cut and feel. The twins had given her a wand maintenance kit. They'd handed it to her before bed the night before, but Ada had made a point of opening it properly that morning. The gloves she'd given the twins were practical, perfect for their constant outdoor antics. Charlie had sent a collection of tales about British wizarding lore, something like a storyteller's digest. Ada had returned his gift with a model Hebridean black dragon that could fly and breathe tiny puffs of fire. She only hoped it wouldn't singe Charlie's sheets. Ada and Percy, both avid readers, exchanged books in a predictably sensible swap. She'd given Ron a set of wizard chess and Ginny a copy of Hogwarts, a history. Ada had made sure to bring small presents for all her school friends. Someone she hadn't expected to hear from did send her a gift. Cedric Diggory had sent a large box of chocolate frogs. Ada hadn't prepared anything for him and felt a little embarrassed. When the family gathered at the kitchen table, Mrs. Weasley distributed hand-knitted sweaters, one for everyone. She always had the hardest time telling the twins apart. After much hemming and hawing, she still couldn't be sure, and in the end, the two of them swapped sweaters themselves before putting them on. Mrs. Weasley, of course, could tell them apart. Fred and George just liked to pretend otherwise, and over the years she had learned not to argue the point. Last year, Ada had envied the twins' sweaters. This year, she finally had one of her own, a warm red jumper with a large golden E for her name. They all began to put their sweaters on, the room full of small, cheerful chaos. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley watched with contented smiles. Christmas was meant for family, and though it was a pity Bill couldn't come home this year, everyone else was present and in high spirits. Mrs. Weasley's Christmas feast began with smoked salmon, perfectly seasoned. Roast turkey, plump and stuffed with onions and potatoes, sat at the center of the table, surrounded by mashed potatoes, carrots, Brussels sprouts with smoked bacon, and other customary trimmings. Mr. Weasley poured himself a measure of fire whiskey. Charlie, being of age, was allowed a small toast with his father. The twins stared at Charlie with hungry looks, and even Percy's face showed a trace of envy. Mrs. Weasley noticed at once and, smiling, brought out a large tray of butterbeer, handing it round to everybody, even Ron and Ginny, who hadn't yet started at Hogwarts. Mr. Weasley raised his glass. "Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!" they all answered. Whether it was the strong fire whiskey or the warming butterbeer, everyone drank eagerly. The table buzzed with laughter and chatter. Arms were slung around shoulders. People hummed familiar tunes. A flushed Mrs. Weasley launched into an enthusiastic, jazzy rendition of "A Cauldron Full of Hot, Strong Love," her favorite song by Celestina Warbeck. Mr. Weasley loved to talk to Ada about Muggle things, although his questions could sometimes sound childlike. Today, however, his questions were more challenging. He wanted to know how Muggles made cars move without magic, how they were repaired when they broke down. These were not topics anyone could answer in a few words. Ada scratched her head, wondering how to explain without launching into a full lesson on the Industrial Revolution and steam engines. She settled for a careful, everyday explanation of engines and mechanics. As Mr. Weasley listened, his eyes grew brighter and brighter. He drained his glass in one gulp and later would make a decision that felt pleasantly momentous. By evening, the house was brightly decorated. The cracker snaps under the Christmas tree had been pulled, leaving paper strewn across the carpet. Charlie was sat at the table playing cards with Percy and the twins, while Ron guarded a plate piled high with mince pies. Charlie, who'd been spectacularly defeated by Ada at cards the night before, no longer dared to play her. He finally understood why the twins had tried to stop him from joining them. Ada lounged on the sofa, feigning indignation. She wasn't good at wizard chess and had been left out of that game, fine. But she was excellent at cards. How could they not include her? It felt like a conspiracy. Mrs. Weasley crossed the room with a tray of eggnog, and Ginny, sitting beside Ada, leaned in and whispered, "When we go to bed tonight, can you make the flower appear again? Don't be silly, Ginny. Ada isn't supposed to do magic outside school, Mrs. Weasley said, overhearing as she handed out cups. Charlie looked up from his hand of cards. Ginny, after this round I'll show you, he promised. Ada didn't blame Ginny for blurting it out. Ginny was always straightforward. Ada herself had been twitchy all day, wanting to do more than she was allowed. She clasped her hands together and murmured, "It'll be fine. Hogwarts won't find out." "It's not a matter of being found out. It's about safety," Mr. Weasley said, suddenly serious, even pausing in the middle of peeling a small tangerine. But Ada relaxed her clenched fingers. A tight green bud had appeared in her palm. Ginny, impatient, blew gently on it, and the bud unfurled into a small, perfect flower. Charlie and Percy went quiet, jaws slack. Ron put down his mince pie. The twins, unsurprisingly, tried to sneak a look and then cheat at cards while everyone else was distracted. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley exchanged a long, astonished look. How many 13-year-olds could do wandless magic? The room still hummed with disbelief when the flower cracked open again, then transformed. Two delicate butterflies unfurled from the petals and rose, glittering and fluttering as they circled around Ginny, trailing a faint shimmer in the lamplight.